She was an hour late for our first date, but what she revealed changed everything. He had been sitting at that table for 53 minutes, and every single one of those minutes had a weight to it. Nathan Cole was not a man who was used to waiting, not because he was impatient by nature, but because he had learned the hard way that waiting for someone who was not coming was one of the loneliest feelings a person could carry. He had learned that at 19, standing outside a school hall waiting for his father to show up to his graduation. His father never came. He had stood there in his gown, holding his certificate, watching every other family take photographs, and he had made a quiet promise to himself that he would never again arrange his hope around someone else's arrival. And yet here he was, 49 days after matching with Claire Whitfield on a dating app, 6 phone calls that had gone longer than either of them planned, and one carefully chosen restaurant. Here he was, sitting at a corner table with a glass of water he had been nursing for nearly an hour, watching the door. The restaurant was called Alderton's. It was the kind of place that was warm without trying too hard. Wooden tables, soft lighting, the smell of something slow-cooked drifting from the kitchen. Nathan had chosen it because it felt honest, not flashy, not a place designed to impress, just a good, solid place where two people could sit and talk without the noise of the world pressing in on them. He had arrived 7 minutes early. He always arrived early. It was a habit built from years of wanting to be ready, wanting to be the kind of man who was already there when someone walked through the door. At 7 minutes past the time they had agreed, he had smiled to himself. Traffic, he thought, or parking, one of those small, manageable things that happen to everyone. At 20 minutes past, he had looked at his phone twice and put it face down on the table. He ordered water. The waiter had come back with a small bread basket, and Nathan had thanked him with the careful politeness of a man trying very hard to look like he was not waiting. At 35 minutes, he had started composing a message in his head, something light, something that left the door open without sounding desperate, something that said he understood without saying he was hurt. At 48 minutes, he had stopped composing the message and had simply sat with the feeling. He was a therapist by profession. He spent his working days helping other people sit with their feelings, name them, hold them without flinching. He told his clients regularly that discomfort was not danger. He believed it. He practiced it. He sat with the feeling, and the feeling was this. He had liked her, more than was probably sensible after only 6 phone calls. He had liked the way she laughed a half-second after other people, like she was turning the joke over in her mind before she let herself enjoy it. He had liked the way she argued with him about things that did not matter, the best kind of bread, whether winter mornings were underrated, with the energy of someone who had opinions she had been saving up. He had liked that she was a primary school teacher, not because it was what she had always planned, but because one afternoon, when she was 22 and doing something entirely different, a child in a supermarket had looked up at her and asked her a question that no adult had thought to ask him, and she had felt something crack open in her chest. She had told him that on their 3rd phone call, and he had not forgotten it. He had liked her, and sitting at this table, watching the door, he was slowly and quietly making peace with the possibility that it was not going to happen. Then the door opened. She came in still wearing her coat. Her hair was half up, like she had started to pin it and then thought better of it, or simply run out of time. Her eyes moved across the room quickly, searching, and when they found him, when she finally saw him sitting at that corner table, she did not smile. She did not do the thing that people do when they are relieved to find someone still waiting. She looked like she was about to say something she had been rehearsing. He stood up. Not because he had thought about it, but because his body had decided before his mind caught up. He stood up and he watched her cross the room toward him, and the thing he noticed, the thing that stayed with him later when he was turning the evening over, was that she looked sorry. Not in the way people look sorry when they have done something careless. in the way people look when they have done something they did not know how to stop themselves from doing. She reached the table. She looked at him for one long moment. She said, "I owe you more than an apology." The waiter appeared at Nathan's shoulder with a quiet, professional calm. Nathan looked at him and said, "Could you give us a few minutes?" The waiter nodded and disappeared. Nathan sat back down. Claire sat across from him. She still had her coat on. Her hands were flat on the table, and he could see that she had thought about what she was going to say, but now that she was here, the words were not cooperating. He did not fill the silence. He had learned, over years of sitting across from people in difficult moments, that silence was not empty. Silence was where the true things lived. If you rushed in and filled it, you usually got the polished version, the version people had already made safe. But if you waited, if you sat in the silence with someone and let it breathe, something else would come through. Something real. He waited. She looked down at her hands on the table. Then she looked up at him. "I was parked 2 blocks from here," she said, "for 41 minutes. He said nothing. "I wasn't lost," she said. "I wasn't on a call, I sat there in my car, with the engine off." Nathan looked at her. He did not say it was fine, because it was not about whether it was fine. He did not say he understood, because he wanted to understand, and those were 2 different things. He said, "Tell me." And she did. She told him about the parking space on Alderton Street, 2 blocks north, the one she had pulled into at 3 minutes past the time they were supposed to meet. She had sat in the dark of her car with her hands on the steering wheel, and she had watched people walk past on the pavement, couples, people walking dogs, a man carrying a pizza box, and she had thought about driving home. Not once. 3 times she had genuinely considered it. 3 times she had come within one decision of starting the engine and leaving. She said it quietly, without drama, the way people say true things. Nathan sat very still. Outside, a bus passed. The restaurant hummed gently around them. Someone at a table across the room laughed at something, and the sound floated over and dissolved. He looked at the woman across from him, the woman who had been in a car 2 blocks away for 41 minutes, who had almost driven home, who had come through the door anyway, and he felt something he had not expected to feel. He felt moved. Not in the soft, comfortable way, in the sharp, sudden way, the way you feel when something unexpected turns out to matter. He picked up the 2 menus that had been sitting on the edge of the table and held one out to her. "Tell me what was going through your mind," he said, "all 41 minutes. She looked at the menu in his hand. She looked at him. Something in her face shifted, not relief exactly, but something in that direction. Something like the beginning of permission. She took the menu. She did not open it yet. She said, "You are not angry." It was not quite a question. "No," he said. "Most people would be angry." "I am not most people," he said, and he meant it simply, without performance. She looked at him for a moment in a way that he could not fully read, like she was trying to figure out whether to believe that, like she had heard things like that before and had learned, at some cost, to be careful about which ones she trusted. He did not push. He just waited. He was good at waiting when the waiting was for something worth waiting for. She opened the menu. She said, "Okay." He opened his own. Outside, the night had properly settled in. The street beyond the restaurant window was lit in the amber of the lamps, and the cold that had been in the air all week had sharpened into something serious. People passed outside with their collars up. Inside Alderton's, at a corner table that had been a table for one for nearly an hour, 2 people sat across from each other with their menus open, and the conversation that was about to happen was not going to be the kind of first-date conversation either of them had planned. It was going to be better than that. And Nathan Cole, who had arrived 7 minutes early and spent 53 minutes sitting alone at a corner table, who had made a promise to himself at 19 that he would never again arrange his hope around someone else's arrival, was sitting with the quiet understanding that some promises are worth breaking. He had stayed. She had come through the door. The rest was still being written. The waiter came back at the right moment, which is to say he waited long enough that neither of them felt rushed, but not so long that the silence between them had time to become uncomfortable. He was a professional, and professionals know that timing is everything. Claire ordered a pasta dish almost without looking at the menu. She had not eaten since noon, she realized. She had been too wound up to eat, moving through the afternoon in that particular state of anticipatory anxiety that she knew too well. The one where your body is already bracing for something, and your stomach quietly refuses to cooperate. Nathan ordered something from the grill. He closed his menu with the decisiveness of a man who had made his choice and was done second-guessing it. Claire noticed that about him. He made decisions cleanly. Not fast, not reckless, just clean. He looked at a thing, figured it out, and moved on. She found it disorienting in the best way because she was not like that. She turned things over and over, looking for the angle she had missed, the detail that might change the picture. The waiter left. The bread basket was still there, mostly untouched. Claire pulled a piece of bread apart and held it without eating it, because she needed something to do with her hands while she talked. "You want to know about the 41 minutes," she said. "If you want to tell me," Nathan said. She appreciated that, the way he left the door open instead of pushing through it. She had expected, when she walked into this restaurant, to find a man who was annoyed and trying to hide it. She had prepared for the polite cold shoulder, the tight smile, the way some people made you feel the size of what you had done without ever saying it directly. She had prepared for that because she had earned it. She had not prepared for this. She had not prepared for a man who stood up when she walked in, who handed her a menu, who looked at her with the particular steady attention of someone who was actually listening and not just performing it. So she told him. She told him that she had pulled into the parking space on Alderton Street and turned off the engine and sat in the dark. She told him that the first thing she had felt was relief at not having to walk through the door yet, at having a few more minutes before the whole thing began. She told him that she had looked at herself in the rear-view mirror and thought, "What are you doing here?" Not in a cruel way, just honestly. Just, "What are you doing, Claire Whitfield, sitting in a parked car in a dress on a Wednesday night, about to go and try again?" Because she had tried before. She had shown up before. She had done the thing that everyone told her to do: get back out there. Don't let one bad experience close you off. Trust that not everyone is the same. She had listened to all of that. She had believed most of it. She had even, in her better moments, believed it about herself, that she was someone capable of this, capable of sitting across from a new person with an open heart and seeing what happened. And then the moment would come, the actual moment, when the idea of it became the reality of it, and something inside her would go very quiet and very still, the way a small animal goes still when it senses something in the air. Nathan was watching her, not impatiently, just watching. She put the piece of bread down. 3 years ago, she said, and then she stopped. She had not planned to say this. She had a version of herself she brought to first dates, careful, warm, funny when the moment allowed it. A version that kept certain things tucked away until there was enough trust built to bring them out. She had planned to be that version tonight. But she had already blown the version. She had blown it in the parking space on Alderton Street, and she had blown it again when she walked through the door after 58 minutes and told this man she owed him more than an apology. The careful version had already left the building. 3 years ago, she said again, I was in a relationship that took things from me I did not know I was giving away. Nathan said nothing. His face did not change in the way people's faces sometimes changed when you said something like that, the small wince, the look of someone calculating how serious this is going to get. His face simply stayed open. I am not going to go into all of it, she said. Not tonight, not in a restaurant. She said it lightly, and he gave her the smallest nod, the one that said, "I understand, I am not asking for all of it. But I will tell you what it left me with," she said, "because that is actually the relevant part." She had thought about this a lot. She had spent a long time in the wreckage of that relationship trying to figure out what it had actually done to her, because she knew that if she could name it clearly enough, she could begin to work against it. She was logical like that. She believed in naming things. It was one of the reasons she was good at her job. She was patient enough to sit with a confused 8-year-old and help them find the word for what they were feeling, and she applied the same patience to herself. What it had left her with was this: a very deep suspicion of her own judgment. Not of other people, of herself. Because the relationship had not ended in one dramatic moment that she could point to and say, "There, that is where it went wrong, that is the thing I should have seen." It had ended in a long, slow accumulation of small moments, each one of which she had explained away, rationalized, absorbed. She had been very good at explaining things away. She had told herself for a long time that she was being perceptive, that she was seeing the nuance in a complicated person, that the things that hurt her were not meant the way they felt. She had been wrong. And the problem, the real problem, the one she was still working through, was that she had trusted herself so much and been so wrong that she no longer trusted herself at all. Every time she met someone new, some part of her was watching herself the way you watch a friend who has made bad decisions before, waiting for her to get it wrong again, waiting for the moment when she would see, too late, that she had missed something. So she sat in parking spaces in the dark. So she turned the engine off and looked in the rear-view mirror and asked herself, "What are you doing here?" She told Nathan all of this. Not in exactly those words. She circled it, came at it from different angles, found the edges of it by talking around the middle. But she told him. And when she was done, the bread basket was cold, and neither of them had opened a wine menu, and the restaurant had filled up and gotten louder around them while their corner had stayed quiet. Nathan did not say, "I understand how you feel." He did not say, "You just need to trust yourself again," like it was a thing someone could simply decide to do. He did not say, "Well, you came in, so that is the important thing, right?" with the cheerful finality of someone wrapping a difficult thing up neatly so they could move past it. He said, "How many parking spaces have there been?" She looked at him. "Before tonight," he said. "How many times have you pulled over and sat with the engine off?" She thought about it honestly. "4," she said, "including tonight." "And the other 3 times?" She looked at the table. "I drove home." The simplicity of it sat between them. She had driven home 3 times. She had come in once. Once out of 4 attempts she had walked through the door. She was not sure whether that was a good record or a terrible one. Nathan said, "You came in tonight." "I know," she said. "That matters," he said, "not because you owe me anything, but because you decided something tonight that you decided differently 3 other times. That is not a small thing, Claire." She looked at him. And there was that feeling again, the disorienting one, the one she did not know what to do with. The feeling of being seen by someone who had no reason to look that carefully. She said, "Can I ask you something?" "Yes." "Why are you still here?" He looked at her with that same steady, unhurried attention. "Because the person who sent me voice messages about why winter mornings are underrated is interesting, and I wanted to find out if the person sitting across from me right now is the same person." She felt something tighten in her throat, not grief, not fear, something else, something she had not felt in a long time. She said, "And?" He picked up his water glass. "Same person," he said, "more of her." She laughed, not the careful laugh she had planned on bringing tonight. The real one, the one that came a half-second late, the one she did not know she was going to let out until it was already out. He smiled. The waiter arrived with their food. For the first time since she had pulled into that parking space on Alderton Street with her engine off and her hands on the steering wheel, Claire Whitfield felt something loosen in her chest. Not everything, just a corner of it, just enough to take a breath. She picked up her fork. She was still sitting across from a man she had met 51 minutes ago in real life. A man she had almost not met at all. A man who had sat at a table alone for nearly an hour and had still looked at her like she was worth the wait. She did not know what happened after this. She did not know if he would become someone important in her life or simply a good evening. She carried forward as evidence that showing up was sometimes worth it. She did not know, and the not knowing was the part that had always sent her back to the car. But she picked up her fork and she stayed. And outside, 2 blocks north, her car sat empty and cold on Alderton Street, and for the first time in 3 years she was not in it. The food was good, and neither of them ate much. That was not a complaint. It was simply the way it worked when the conversation had taken on a life of its own, when you were both too caught up in what was being said to remember that there was a plate in front of you. Claire had eaten enough to stop the quiet complaining her stomach had been doing since noon, and Nathan had cleared about half of what he had ordered, and then the plates had been pushed slightly to the side in the wordless agreement of 2 people who had found something more interesting than food. Nathan had started talking somewhere around the midpoint of the pasta, and the way it happened was this. Claire had told him something about the year that had gone wrong for her, not the whole of it. She had said she would not do that tonight, and she kept that promise to herself, but enough that the shape of it was visible. And Nathan had sat with that shape for a moment, and then he had said, "Can I tell you something back?" She had said yes. He told her about his father. Not the beginning of the story, not the part where his father was young and difficult and present in all the wrong ways. He started near the end of it, because that was the part that mattered for what they were talking about. He told her about the year his father got sick, the kind of sick that does not resolve or improve but simply progresses, and the particular experience of watching someone you have a complicated history with become someone who needs you. He had flown back from a conference in Edinburgh when the call came. He had taken the train to the hospital from the airport with his conference bag still over his shoulder. He remembered the weight of the bag. He remembered thinking, on the train, about all the things he had left unsaid with his father, not because he had been too afraid to say them, but because some part of him had always assumed there would be a better time, a calmer time, a time when the history between them had settled enough that the important things could be said cleanly. He had assumed, in short, that there was more time. There was not more time. His father died 11 days after he came home, and in those 11 days, Nathan had sat in the hospital beside a man he had never quite known how to be close to, and he had said some of the things. Not all of them, some of them. And he had thought in the hospital, during the long, quiet hours that hospitals contain, about all the moments he had not shown up for. Not literally. He had been physically present in his father's life well enough. But there were moments, conversations his father had tried to start, things his father had reached toward, where Nathan had kept a careful, professional distance, the kind of distance he was very good at maintaining, because the alternative was being close to something that could hurt him. Claire was watching him the way he had watched her earlier, not impatiently, just watching. He had not planned to tell her this tonight. He had a version of himself that he brought to first dates too, interested, warm, curious about the other person, good at asking questions. A version that kept certain things back until the time was right. But she had blown that version open when she sat down and told him about 41 minutes in a dark car, and something in him had recognized what she was doing, the courage it took, the decision it represented, and he had felt that it deserved something real in return. So he told her about the parking lot. Not a street parking space this time. The hospital car park, where he had sat after a particularly long day with his father, 3 days before his father died, with his engine off and his hands on the steering wheel. He had sat there for a long time. He was not sure exactly how long. Long enough that it had gotten dark, and the lights in the car park had come on around him, and he had not moved. He had sat there thinking about regret. About the specific texture of regret that comes not from doing the wrong thing, but from not doing the right thing. About all the doors he had not walked through. And he had made a decision, sitting in that car park in the dark. He had decided that he was going to stop treating his life like something he would get around to fully living when the conditions were more convenient. He had spent a large part of his adult life being ready for things rather than in them. Ready to have a serious relationship when work was less demanding. Ready to visit his father when the history between them had cooled. Ready to let people in when he was more certain they would not leave. Always ready, never quite there. He told Claire this without performing it, without making it into a lesson. He just described what it had felt like to sit in that car park and see himself clearly for the first time in a long time. When he was done talking, the restaurant had gotten quieter. It was later than either of them had noticed, the way time does that when you are genuinely somewhere. Claire had her elbows on the table, her chin resting lightly on her joined hands. She was looking at him with an expression he could not entirely read, something careful and warm at the same time. She said, "You became a therapist because you are bad at the things you teach." It was not an insult. She said it with the precision of someone who had thought of the right thing to say and was not going to soften it into something less true. He laughed genuinely. "Yes," he said. "Exactly that." She smiled. He said, "What made you become a teacher?" She told him about the supermarket again, the story she had told him on their third phone call about the child who had looked up at her and asked her a question no adult had thought to ask him. But this time she told him more. She told him the question the child had asked, which she had not told him on the phone. The child had been standing in the cereal aisle, and his mother had been moving ahead without looking back, and the child had stopped and looked up at Claire, who had been passing with a basket, and had said, "Do you think anyone notices if you are gone?" She had put her basket down. She had crouched to be at his level. She had said, "Yes, I notice right now." The child had looked at her for a long moment. Then his mother had called for him, and he had run off, and Claire had stood back up in the cereal aisle and understood that she had been given a direction. Nathan was very still. "How old was he?" he said. 6, she said, "maybe 7. Nathan said nothing for a moment. He was sitting with it, the way he had watched her sit with her own stories. The way she was beginning to understand he sat with most things, fully, without rushing toward the next thing. "What happened after you told him you noticed?" Nathan said. "He looked at me for about 3 seconds, she said, and then he ran to find his mom, and I don't know his name. I never saw him again, but I went home that afternoon and I started looking into teacher training." "Because of 3 seconds," Nathan said. "Because of 3 seconds," she said. He looked at her with the particular quality of attention that she was starting to recognize as his, the kind that did not flinch away, did not look for the summary, did not want to wrap it up, the kind that just stayed. "You changed your whole life because a child asked you a question in a cereal aisle," he said. "Yes. And the question was one that you recognized," he said, not loudly, just quietly accurate. She looked at him. She did not answer that. She did not need to. He did not push it. They sat with that for a moment. Then Claire said, "Can I ask you something about your job?" "Yes." "When you sit across from someone who is carrying something very heavy, something they have been carrying for a long time, what is the hardest part?" "For you." He thought about it honestly, the way she was coming to appreciate he thought about everything. "The hardest part," he said, "is not trying to fix it, not because I do not want to help, but because the fixing instinct, when you act on it too soon, takes something away from the person. It takes away the experience of being heard without an agenda." She looked at him. Most people, he said, have spent their lives being heard by people who were already thinking about the solution before the sentence was finished. Being heard without an agenda is rarer than it should be, and it does more work than any solution I could offer. She said, "Is that what you did tonight? Heard without an agenda?" "I tried," he said. She nodded slowly. "It worked," she said. The waiter came and asked about dessert. Neither of them had noticed how late it had gotten. The restaurant was quieter now. Most of the other tables had turned over once or twice since they had arrived. They had been at that corner table for a long time. Claire said yes to dessert. Nathan said yes too. And they kept talking, not about heavy things now, but about the lighter, stranger things that come up when two people have already gone deep and earned the right to be silly. She told him about a parent at her school who had once sent her a very polite but very firm email explaining that competitive spelling was traumatic for children, which she had read out to her colleague in the staff room in a voice that was not entirely kind. He told her about a session he had once conducted in which he had fallen asleep for what he believed was between 3 and 7 seconds, and he had never been entirely sure whether the client had noticed. She laughed at that, the real laugh, not the careful one. He watched her laugh and felt the same sharp feeling he had felt before, the one behind the ribs, the one that had something to do with how close this evening had come to not happening. 2 blocks away, engine off, 41 minutes. He thought, she was right there, and she almost didn't come in, and I would never have known what I missed. That was the thing about missed connections. They were invisible. You never knew what the version of your life looked like where you hadn't shown up, where the door had stayed closed, where the parking space on Alderton Street had been the whole story. You just lived the version that happened, whatever it was. He was glad, with a completeness he had not felt in a long time, about the version that was happening. She was eating her dessert now, something with chocolate and a scoop of vanilla on the side, and talking about her classroom, about a child who had recently decided that the letter Q was personally offensive to him and had refused to write it in any context. She was describing the serious negotiation she had undertaken over 3 days to bring this child back to a position of tolerance toward the letter Q, and the story was told with such affection and such precise detail that Nathan could see the child clearly, could see Claire kneeling beside his desk, with the patience of someone who knew that this was not really about the letter Q at all. He thought, this is what she does every day. She shows up, she kneels down, she stays until something shifts. He thought, she learned that in a cereal aisle, from a 7-year-old boy whose name she never knew. And she had almost not come in tonight. He picked up his spoon. Outside, the night had gotten deep and cold. The restaurant was warm. In the amber light of Alderton's, at a corner table that had started the evening as a table for one, 2 people were eating dessert, and the story was not over yet. Not even close. The bill came and they had a small, genuine argument about it. Not the kind of argument that is really a performance of politeness, where both people reach for the bill with the theatrical commitment of someone who has no intention of actually paying. They had a real disagreement, the kind that had a little heat in it, and Claire lost, though she made him work for it. Nathan put his card down. Claire told him that she had been late and the least she could do was pay. He told her that being late and the reason she had been late were 2 different things, and the reason was not something she owed him for. She told him that was a very convenient argument for a man who wanted to pay. He smiled and said he supposed it was, and she narrowed her eyes at him, and he paid. She made him accept a compromise. She was buying the next round if they went somewhere after. He agreed to that without making a big thing of it, which she noticed. He did not say if you want to, or we don't have to if you're tired, or any of the cautious things people say when they are not sure whether the other person is looking for an exit. He just agreed, like it was already settled. Like, of course there was a next thing. She found she liked that. They left Alderton's at 10:15, stepping out into the cold of the street, and the cold was the honest kind, the kind that arrives in your lungs before your brain registers it. Claire pulled her coat tighter. Nathan put his hands in his pockets. They walked in the same direction without discussing it, which was the direction of the old part of the city where the streets got narrower, and there was a late-night coffee place she had mentioned once in a phone call that she had not expected him to remember. He had remembered it. She thought about that as they walked. She thought about all the things he had remembered, not the big things, not the headline things, but the details. The kind of bread she liked. The name of the child in her class who had first made her rethink her career plan. The coffee place she had mentioned in passing, almost as a footnote, weeks ago. She had spent a long time, after the relationship that broke her trust in herself, paying attention to what people remembered about her. Not because she was keeping score, but because she had learned that memory was intention made visible. The things a person chose to hold on to were the things a person had decided mattered. Nathan Cole, it turned out, had been paying attention. The coffee place was called Birch. It was small and warm, the kind of place that had mismatched chairs and good music at a volume that let you talk, and it stayed open until midnight because the owner believed, on principle, that good coffee was a late-night necessity and not just a morning one. There were 4 other people inside when they came in. A couple near the window reading the same newspaper without talking. A young man working on a laptop with the focused misery of someone who had left an assignment too late. A woman in her 60s reading a novel with the undistracted serenity of someone who had reached the age of doing exactly what she wanted. They took a table near the back. Claire ordered a flat white. Nathan ordered a black coffee, which she judged him for briefly, and he accepted the judgment without defending himself, which made her laugh. She was laughing a lot tonight, more than she had laughed in a while. She had not expected that. She had expected a difficult evening, had prepared for the specific exhaustion of being social while managing her own anxiety, of performing normalcy while something inside her watched from a careful distance. She had done that before. She was practiced at it. But this had not been that. This had been something she had almost forgotten was possible, an evening that was genuinely good, not because everything was easy or because no difficult things had been said. The opposite, in fact. It had been good because the difficult things had been said, and they had been heard, and the evening had kept going anyway. Nathan was looking at her. "What?" she said. "Nothing," he said. "I was just thinking." "About what?" He held his coffee cup in both hands. He said, "I was thinking about what you said about not trusting your own judgment anymore, about watching yourself." She waited. "I think," he said carefully, "that the judgment you do not trust is the one that missed things before, and I understand that, but that is not the only judgment you have." She said, "What do you mean?" "You are a teacher," he said. "You read children all day. You read rooms. You know when something is off before anyone else in the room knows it. That is the same faculty, the same instinct. And you trust it completely in that context." She was looking at him. "You have never doubted it in your classroom," he said. "The child who is struggling, the one who is acting out because something is wrong at home, you feel that before you can explain it." She said quietly, "Yes." "So the judgment is not broken," he said. "You just stopped trusting it when it came to your own life." She put her coffee down. She had spent 3 years trying to work out what had happened to her. She had read things about it, had talked to people about it, had turned it over in the long, quiet hours of early mornings when the thoughts came whether you wanted them or not. She had made progress. She knew she had. But progress was slow and often invisible from the inside, like a plant growing, and sometimes she still felt like she was in the same place she had been at the beginning, sitting with the same broken compass. And then this man she had met 53 minutes late, This man she had almost not met at all had taken what she had told him over a pasta dish in a restaurant and had handed it back to her arranged differently, and she could see it differently, just like that. She could see that the compass was not broken. She had just stopped believing it worked. She said, "You are very good at your job." He smiled, but his eyes were serious. "I am not doing my job right now," he said. "I am just talking to you." The distinction mattered. She understood why he made it. She looked at him for a moment across the small table in the small coffee place, with the mismatched chairs and the good low music, and the woman in her 60s reading her novel with perfect serenity. She thought about the parking space on Alderton Street, the engine off, the steering wheel cold under her hands, the 3 times she had nearly started the engine. She thought about the 3 other parking spaces, the 3 other evenings, where she had started the engine and driven home. She thought about what those evenings had felt like the next morning, the complicated mix of relief and something she did not like to name, something that sat in the chest and pressed. She thought about what this evening felt like. It felt like oxygen. It felt like a window had been opened somewhere in a room that had been closed for a long time. She was not going to say that out loud. It was too much for a first evening, too large a thing to say to someone she had known for 3 hours, but she felt it, and feeling it was enough for tonight. She said, "I'm glad I didn't drive home." He looked at her with that steady, unhurried attention. "So am I," he said. They stayed at Birch until it closed, which was midnight on the dot, the owner politely but firmly moving the last 4 customers toward the door with the cheerful efficiency of someone who had a principle and intended to keep it. Outside on the pavement, the cold settled back around them. The street was quiet. The amber lamps did their steady work on the dark. They walked back toward where their cars were parked, her car on Alderton Street, his on the road behind the restaurant. They walked without hurrying. At the point where their routes separated, they stopped. Claire said, "Thank you for staying." He said, "Thank you for coming in." They stood there for a moment in the cold. She said, "I am going to drive home now and resist the urge to replay every single thing I said tonight at least 7 times. He said, "And I am going to drive home and do the same thing, but I am going to tell myself it is professional processing." She laughed. He said, "I would like to do this again, if you would like to do this again." She said, "I would like to do this again." "Then we will," he said, simply, like it was already true. She walked the 2 blocks back to her car on Alderton Street, the parking space where she had sat for 41 minutes with her engine off and her hands on the wheel. She stopped beside it for a moment before she got in. The street was empty. The cold was real. Somewhere down the road, the city was doing its quiet late-night work. She got in the car. She put the key in the ignition and started the engine immediately. She did not sit. She did not look in the rear-view mirror. She did not ask herself what she was doing. She drove. Nathan drove home through the empty city and did not turn the radio on. He liked the silence sometimes, not the silence of avoidance, not the silence he had maintained for too many years as a way of not feeling the things he did not want to feel. This was a different kind, the silence after a full evening, the kind that is not empty but full, the way silence can be after good music, like the sound has soaked into the air and is still there, just below hearing. He drove through the lit streets and thought about the evening. He thought about it honestly, the way he tried to think about most things, without the softening that people sometimes apply to experiences they want to be better than they were. He was a therapist. He believed in honest accounting. The honest account was this. It had been one of the best evenings he could remember. Not the best first date he had ever been on, though it ranked. Not just that. It was one of those evenings that had the quality of mattering while it was still happening, the rare kind where you did not have to wait until later to know that something real had occurred. He thought about what she had told him. Not with the professional part of his mind, he was strict about that boundary, would not do to her what he did with clients, would not turn her into a case study or start filing her experiences into the familiar categories. He thought about what she had told him simply as a person listening to another person. She had been in a parking space 2 blocks away for 41 minutes. She had almost driven home. She had come through the door anyway. He had been sitting at a table for nearly an hour. He had stayed. 2 very different experiences of the same fear, he thought. The fear that the real version of you, the one underneath the first date version, the one with the parking spaces and the car parks and the hospital bags and the unsaid things, would be too much, or not enough, or simply wrong in some way that could not be repaired. They had both shown up. He turned onto his road and slowed for the small speed bump that the council had installed 3 years ago after a petition from the residents, which he had signed. It was a long road, tree-lined, the trees bare now in the late autumn, their shapes against the sky like something a child would draw if you asked them to draw winter. He had lived on this road for 8 years. He knew every variation of it, the morning version, the summer version, the version it became when it rained. He had walked it at 2 in the morning after long hospital shifts with his father, back in that year. He had driven down it on the evening he got his first proper research paper published, and had not been able to tell anyone because it was 10 o'clock and there was nobody to call. He had spent a lot of his life on this road, with things he could not tell anyone. He thought about Claire Whitfield, sitting in her car on Alderton Street, asking herself what she was doing. He thought she trusted herself enough to walk through the door, after 3 other times when she hadn't. After a year that took something from her. After all of it, she found enough to get out of the car. He parked. He sat for a moment with the engine off. He was aware of the small irony of this, and he felt it with the dry humor he applied to most things about himself. He got out of the car. Inside, his flat was quiet and warm. He had left a lamp on in the living room. He always did when he went out in the evening, a habit from years of coming home to darkness and finding it unwelcoming in a way that was out of proportion to what darkness actually was. The lamp made the room amber when he came through the door, and he stood in the hallway for a moment looking at it. He thought about his father. He did sometimes, in the way you think about people who are gone, not as a sad thought, not anymore, but as a presence, a consideration. He thought about the hospital car park. The engine off, the decision he had made in the dark. He had said, sitting in that car park, I am going to stop treating my life like a waiting room. He had meant it. He had tried to live up to it. He had tried to walk through more doors. He had not always managed it. There had been evenings where he too had started the engine and driven home, where the easier choice had felt like the only choice, where the distance had felt safer than the closeness. But tonight he had stayed at the table, and she had come through the door. He made a cup of tea, because it was late and he was trying to be sensible about coffee, which was a relatively new development in his life that he was not entirely sure he endorsed, and he sat at his kitchen table and thought about what came next. He was good at thinking about what came next, planning, structuring, considering the angles. It was part of how he was built. He liked knowing the shape of things before he was inside them. But there were things that did not have a shape before you were inside them. There were things that could only be learned by being in them. He thought about the question she had asked him at Birch, leaning across the small table with her coffee, about the hardest part of his work. He had told her, not trying to fix it, being heard without an agenda. He thought about the way she had said, it worked. 2 words, simple, accurate. He thought about the laugh, the real one, the one that came a half-second late, the one she gave to the story about the letter Q. He thought about her in the cereal aisle, setting down her basket and crouching to the level of a 7-year-old boy she did not know, saying, I notice right now. He thought about the kind of person who does that. The kind of person who is carrying their own weight, their own complicated history, their own car park in the dark moments, and still crouches down in a supermarket aisle and makes a child feel noticed. He thought, that is not someone you meet every week. He finished his tea. He looked at his phone and thought about sending a message, something brief, something that said the evening had meant something without making it into a declaration that would be too much for midnight on a Wednesday. He was 51 years old. He knew the difference between something feeling significant and something being simple enough to say. He typed, got home safely. Tonight was good, I mean that. He looked at it, he sent it. He put the phone face down and got ready for bed. His phone lit up at 12:47. He saw it from across the room. He picked it up. She had sent me too on both counts. Good night, Nathan. He set the phone back down. He lay in the dark of his room, the same room he had lain in after hospital nights and published papers and long evenings alone, the room that had held a lot of the version of his life he was trying to grow past, and he thought about all the small decisions that had led to tonight. Her decision 3 times to drive home. Her decision the 4th time not to. His decision, all those years ago in a hospital car park, to stop waiting for better conditions. The way those 2 decisions, made independently and years apart, had produced a corner table and a parking space, and a coffee place called Birch, and a text sent at 12:47 on a Wednesday night. He thought about all the versions of tonight that had almost happened. The version where she drove home. The version where he left a polite message at 50 minutes and called for the bill. The version where neither of them had been brave enough. He thought about closeness, how it required a kind of courage that did not announce itself. Not the loud courage of dramatic decisions, but the quiet courage of getting out of the car, of picking up the menu someone offered you, of answering honestly when someone asked, tell me. He thought about Claire in the parking space on Alderton Street, hands on the wheel, engine off, asking herself what she was doing. And he thought she answered herself. And the answer was this, something that matters, that is what you are doing. She had walked through the door. That was the thing, that was in the end all of it. He fell asleep, and the city did its quiet work around him, and somewhere across town, in a flat he had never seen, a woman who had almost not come through the door was, he imagined, doing the same thing. And the space between that evening and whatever came next was not empty. It was full of possibility, the way a room is full when someone has just left it, still warm, still holding the shape of the people who had been there. He had stayed. She had come in. Everything else was still ahead of them. And that, for the first time in longer than he could honestly remember, felt exactly like enough.